The afternoon sun hung low, casting golden hues across my sprawling ranch. The gentle rustling of leaves blended with the soft lap of water against the shore of my private lake. This spot was my sanctuary, a quiet escape from the noise of everyday life. I had dreamed of this moment for weeks, flying my new kite high above the water, watching it glide and dip with the wind. With a deep breath, I pulled the kite from its bag, a vibrant mix of red and blue, designed to catch the breeze and dance against the sky. I untangled the string carefully, feeling a rush of anticipation. As the first gust of wind picked up, I launched the kite into the air. It soared, climbing higher and higher, twisting and twirling with the invisible currents. For a moment, everything felt perfect. The sky, the water, the breeze, all in harmony. I smiled to myself, content. This was my land, my peace. But then, across the lake, something shifted. I noticed movement near the old dock, a gathering of familiar faces. Members of the HOA, usually busy with meetings and neighborhood rules, stood clustered together. Their expressions weren't friendly. They watched me with a mix of suspicion and annoyance. Whispers floated over the water, sharp enough to cut through the calm dot. I kept flying my kite, thinking maybe they were just curious. But then one of them pulled out a phone and started dialing, confused. I stepped closer to the water's edge, watching as they spoke hurriedly, glancing in my direction. Why are they calling the cops? I wondered aloud. Moments later I heard the distant wail of sirens. My heart skipped. Was flying a kite really a crime? The officers arrived quickly, their cars pulling up beside the gravel road leading to my ranch. 2 officers stepped out, eyes scanning the scene. They approached cautiously, unsure of what awaited them by the lake. The leader of the HOA group, a woman with a sharp voice and sharper eyes, stepped forward. She began explaining, or rather, accusing. She claimed I was trespassing, disturbing the peace, even intimidating neighbors with my reckless kite flying. I blinked, speechless. This was my property. How could flying a kite be a threat? As the officers listened, I calmly asked for specifics. What law was I breaking? Where was the trespassing happening? I requested to see any documents or boundaries that proved my supposed violation. The HOA president's confident tone faltered. She stumbled, unable to provide clear answers. The tension in the air grew thick. I felt eyes on me, some curious, others hostile. The officers exchanged looks, their hands resting near their belts, cautious but uncertain. That it was then I realized this confrontation was about much more than a kite. Something deeper was at play, a conflict over land, boundaries, and control. I was right in the middle of it. With a steady voice, I told the officers I had documents proving the boundaries of my ranch. I promised to share them, not to argue, but to clarify and settle any misunderstandings. The officers nodded slowly, signaling for the HOA group to wait as I retrieved the official land survey from my truck. The group watched silently, the mood shifting from confident accusation to uneasy curiosity. The afternoon sun continued to dip, casting longer shadows across the lake, shadows that would soon reveal truths none of us expected. The officers stood patiently as I carefully unfolded the land survey map on the hood of my truck. The crisp lines and numbers traced the exact boundaries of my ranch, including the lake and surrounding land. My hands trembled just slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to unfold. The HOA president leaned in, her confident posture now replaced by something more guarded. The other members clustered around her, whispering nervously. The officers watched intently, waiting for me to explain. This, I said, pointing to the clearly marked perimeter, is my property. Everything within these lines belongs to me, including this part of the lake. I gestured toward the dock where the HOA members had been standing. Now, look at this. Tracing the edge of the survey, I showed how the dock extended well beyond their claimed property, stretching onto my land. A hush fell over the group. Faces paled. I could feel the shift pride turning to panic. The HOA president cleared her throat, trying to regain control. That can't be right, she insisted. This survey must be outdated or incorrect. I had it updated just last month, I replied evenly, and it was done by a licensed surveyor. If you'd like, I can share the full report. One of the officers stepped closer, squinting at the map. This is official, he asked. Yes, I confirmed, and I'm willing to work with the HOA on an agreement to avoid any future disputes. But for now, the facts speak for themselves. The president's jaw clenched. We don't want trouble, but you're disrupting the community's peace. Flying that kite over the lake, people felt threatened. Threatened by a kite? I said, incredulous. It's a simple toy, nothing more. She narrowed her eyes. It's not about the kite. It's about respect and boundaries. I looked around at the neighbors standing nearby. Some avoided my gaze. Others seemed unsure what to believe. Respect goes both ways, I said quietly, and that includes respecting property lines. An older man from the HOA stepped forward hesitantly. Maybe we can come to some understanding. No need to fight over this. The president shot him a warning glance but said nothing. The officers exchanged looks. One cleared his throat. This isn't a police matter, really. It's a civil issue between neighbors. Exactly, I said. And I want to resolve It peacefully, tension lingered in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. The home members whispered amongst themselves, visibly shaken. Finally, the president sighed. Fine, we'll discuss this. But you need to stop flying that kite until we settle things. I smiled calmly. Fair enough, but only if you acknowledge the property lines correctly. The officers nodded, gathering their things. We're stepping back from this for now. If either party wants legal action, that's for the courts. As they left, the crowd dispersed slowly, some still casting curious glances my way. I stood by the lake, watching the kite droop in my hands. The battle had only just begun, and the calm lake was about to hide many secrets beneath its surface. The days after the confrontation were anything but peaceful. Whispers floated through the neighborhood like restless ghosts, and the atmosphere around the lake felt charged with silent challenges. I kept to my routine but remained alert, knowing this dispute was far from over. One morning, I received a text from an unexpected source, a local surveyor who had heard about the situation through the grapevine. He offered to meet me by the lake to conduct a thorough inspection, claiming he had uncovered something unusual during a previous job nearby. Curious and cautious, I agreed. Later that day, the surveyor arrived with his equipment and began marking points along the water's edge and the dock. As he worked, I watched the HOA members from a distance, their faces a mix of suspicion and unease. After hours of measurements and calculations, the surveyor called me over. You might want to see this, he said, handing me a fresh printout of his findings. The new survey showed that the dock extended even further onto my property than the previous report had indicated. What's more, some of the HOA structures, benches, planters, and even a small storage shed were also positioned over my land. I felt a mix of disbelief and vindication. This wasn't just a minor boundary dispute, it was a much bigger oversight. The HOA had been unknowingly, or perhaps carelessly, using a significant portion of my property. Armed with this new evidence, I knew I had to act, but carefully. I wanted to avoid escalating the conflict, but I also needed to protect what was rightfully mine. I arranged a meeting with the HOA board in my home. The room was tense as I laid out the latest survey, explaining the situation calmly but firmly. The president's face went pale as she realized the full scope of the encroachment. The room buzzed with murmurs. Some board members exchanged worried glances. One board member, who had been skeptical before, spoke up. We had no idea, he admitted. This changes everything. Despite the shock, the president tried to maintain control. We need to find a solution that works for everyone, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. I nodded. I'm open to negotiations, but this has to be settled properly, with respect for the boundaries and for me as the property owner. We agreed to bring in a mediator and legal counsel to draft an updated boundary agreement and usage plan. As the meeting ended, I felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. The truth was finally out, but the real challenge was just beginning. Later that night, I stood by the lake, looking out over the water toward the dock. What had started as a simple afternoon of flying a kite had uncovered a tangled web of misunderstandings and secrets beneath the surface, and somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the last twist in the story. The days that followed the meeting were filled with a quiet tension that pulsed through the neighborhood like an unseen current. The HOA board was restless, and I could sense their unease whenever I crossed paths with any of them. Despite the awkwardness, I remained determined to handle this with patience and reason. Negotiations began in earnest. We brought in a mediator, someone impartial who could guide the discussions toward a fair resolution. The atmosphere in the conference room was thick with unspoken frustrations, but also a cautious hope for compromise. At our first session, I laid out my conditions clearly. A formal agreement recognizing my property lines, proper boundaries marked on the ground, and a legal document granting the HOA limited usage rights to the dock area, nothing more, nothing less. The HOA president, though clearly reluctant, listened. Some board members nodded in agreement. Others remained skeptical, wary of setting a precedent that might invite further challenges. One particularly vocal member argued, if we give in on this, what's to stop anyone else from making similar claims? We need to protect the community. I understood the fear beneath those words, but I knew that holding on to territory that wasn't theirs only invited conflict and uncertainty. Outside the negotiation room, whispers swirled. Rumors of my bold stance and difficult demands circulated among neighbors. Some sympathized. Others felt the HOA's frustration was justified. Despite the pressure, I stayed calm, focusing on what mattered, protecting my land without burning bridges. One evening, as talks seemed to stall, I decided to reach out to the HOA president personally. Over coffee at a local cafe, I shared my vision, a community where boundaries were respected, disputes were resolved fairly, and neighbors could coexist peacefully. She looked surprised by my approach. I wasn't expecting this, she admitted. Most people would have gone to court by now. I prefer solutions that build understanding, I said. The lake and dock can be shared in a way that benefits everyone, but it has to be on honest terms. That conversation marked a subtle shift. The president began to see me not as an adversary, but as someone seeking fairness. Back in the mediation sessions, progress accelerated. We agreed on clear property markers to be installed, and a revised dock usage policy that included scheduled maintenance and shared responsibilities. The HOA members who had once challenged me now participated actively, some even expressing respect for how I handled the situation with dignity. After weeks of negotiation, the final agreement was signed. It was more than a legal document, it was a symbol of new beginnings. As I stood by the lake, watching the sunset cast warm hues over the water, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The kite was ready to fly again, free and unbotted, but beneath the calm surface of the lake, I sensed there was still more to discover, a secret waiting patiently to surface. The weeks after the agreement signing brought an unexpected calm to the neighborhood. The air around the lake felt lighter, as if the tension that had hung over us for months was finally lifting. I noticed neighbors greeting me with nods, and even small smiles, the kind of quiet acknowledgement that comes when hard truths have been faced and accepted. The dock, once a symbol of division, was now a shared space with clear boundaries and mutual respect. The HOA took responsibility for its maintenance, and I appreciated their willingness to cooperate. It wasn't perfect. There were still occasional murmurs from some who grumbled about my stubbornness, but those voices were fading. One afternoon, as the sun warmed the water, I unpacked my kite again. This time, I felt no eyes of suspicion watching. The breeze caught the kite's bright colors, sending it soaring into the sky, a carefree dance against the blue. Children from the neighborhood gathered by the shore, their laughter mixing with the kite's playful swirls. For a moment, I let myself forget the conflict and simply enjoy the scene. This little slice of peace I had fought for, but peace, as I had learned, is often fragile. One evening, while walking the perimeter of my property near the lake, I noticed something strange. Near the base of the dock, partially hidden by mud and reeds, were old metal markers, rusted, worn by time but unmistakably survey stakes. Curious, I carefully dug them free and examined their faded engravings. The markers didn't match the recent surveys. They hinted at older boundaries lines drawn decades before, perhaps never properly documented or forgotten in time. The discovery sent a chill through me. What if these markers revealed something even more significant about the land beneath the lake? What if the boundaries we'd fought over weren't the whole story? I reached out again to the surveyor, asking for a deeper investigation. A few days later, he returned with new equipment, ready to map the lakebed and the land below, the WATERLINE. The survey unveiled something astonishing. The old markers were part of a more extensive claim, extending my property further than anyone had realized. The dock, benches, and even a small boat ramp were sitting on land that legally belonged to me. The implications were huge. The HOA's use of these areas had been unwittingly illegal, but instead of anger or confrontation, I felt a strange calm, determination. I knew this second discovery would stir the pot again, but this time, I was prepared. The community had already seen me stand firm, yet fair. Now, I would use that same balance to protect what was mine, not with threats, but with clarity and respect. As the sun set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the water, I looked at the kite still fluttering in the breeze and smiled. This story was far from over. The revelation of the submerged boundary sent ripples through the neighborhood faster than I expected. News spread that the dock and the boat ramp, places many took for granted, were technically on my property. Some neighbors were shocked, others whispered with suspicion. I decided to call another meeting, this time inviting the entire HOA board. Along with several concerned neighbors, transparency was key. I wanted everyone to understand the facts, not rumors. As we gathered in the community hall, I laid out the new survey results. The maps and old markers clearly showed the expanded property lines beneath the lake's surface, proving the dock, benches, and ramp were all within my land. The room fell silent. Then the HOA president finally spoke, her voice quieter than before. I never expected this. We thought boundaries were settled. I understand, I replied. These things often get lost in time, but now that we know, we have to respect the true property lines. One board member hesitated. So, what does this mean? Will you ask us to remove everything? No, I said firmly. We don't need to escalate this into a feud. Instead, we will amend our agreement. The HOA can continue to use these structures, but with proper permissions and clear understanding that it's on my land. The room relaxed, some nodding in agreement. Then came the surprise. The president spoke up again, her tone more sincere. We'd like to formally apologize for the way we handled things. It was never personal, but we were trying to protect the community. We respect your rights and hope we can move forward as neighbors. I was taken aback, but pleased. That means a lot. I want the same. The mood shifted. What had been a battle turned into a partnership. But just as the meeting seemed to close peacefully, an older neighbor raised his hand. There's one more thing you should know. He pulled out a faded folded document, a handwritten letter from decades ago, found in old county records. It hinted at a promise made by a previous HOA board to allow the use of certain lakeside areas regardless of land ownership, as long as the community maintained them. This letter complicated things. but it also offered a path forward. Together, we agreed to honor that promise in spirit, balancing legal boundaries with community needs. Weeks later, as the new agreement was signed, the HOA president surprised me with a small celebration by the dock. Neighbors gathered, laughter and music filling the air. The kite soared overhead, free and bright, a symbol of our hard-won peace. I looked around, grateful not just for the land, but for the community that had grown stronger through understanding. Sometimes, standing your ground isn't about conflict, it's about finding respect in unexpected places. And as I watched the sunset shimmer on the lake's surface, I knew this was only the beginning of many more stories to come. The days following the celebration were filled with a renewed sense of community. The once tense lines between me and the HOA members softened, replaced by gestures of goodwill and shared moments by the lake. Neighbors who had been wary now stopped to chat. Children played near the dock with laughter echoing across the water, and the kite flew freely, a beacon of the peace we had forged. Despite the calm, I remained mindful that disputes like these rarely resolve completely without vigilance. I made it a habit to check the property lines regularly, keep documentation updated, and maintain open communication with the HOA and neighbors. One afternoon, as I was repairing a section of the dock's railing, the HOA president approached. She handed me a small package, a book of local history, compiled by longtime residents. "Thought you might find this interesting," she said with a tentative smile. As I flipped through its pages, I found stories of the land in Lake Dayton, back over a century, tales of early settlers, hidden coves, and community gatherings that once defined the area. One chapter caught my eye, an old legend about the lake itself. It spoke of a buried treasure hidden beneath the waters, placed there by settlers long ago to protect the community's future. I laughed softly. "A buried treasure," I said aloud, though no one else was around. The president grinned. "Every place has its mysteries." That evening, I stood by the water's edge, the book in my hands and the kite gently fluttering above. The calm surface of the lake held its secrets, but I felt ready for whatever might surface next. My fight for the land had turned into something more, a journey of discovery, respect, and unexpected friendship. And while the battles over boundaries were behind me, the stories of the lake were only just beginning. The kite danced higher, its bright colors bold against the twilight sky, a reminder that even when the wind is calm, the adventure never truly ends. In the days after discovering the old legends in the local history book, I couldn't shake the feeling that the lake held more than just water and land disputes. There was something beneath its calm surface, something waiting to be found. Curiosity got the better of me, so I arranged for a professional dive team to explore the shallow parts near the dock. With the HOA's blessing, now that we had a solid relationship, we began the search together, turning suspicion into shared excitement. The divers returned with surprising news. Remnants of old wooden beams, rusted metal artifacts, and what appeared to be the foundations of a long-forgotten structure, buried under decades of sediment. Local historians and archaeologists were soon involved, uncovering evidence that the site was part of an old trading post used by early settlers. Among the artifacts were tools, pottery, and even a small chest, sealed tight and remarkably well preserved. When the chest was opened, it contained coins, documents, and trinkets that told a story of the community's founders, people who had cared deeply about the land, the lake, and their neighbors. That the discovery brought the neighborhood closer than ever. What began as a bitter dispute had evolved into a shared journey of heritage and pride. At the next HOA meeting, the president proposed turning part of the lakeside into a small historical park, dedicated to the pioneers who shaped the land we all now called home. I volunteered to help lead the project, eager to honor the past and strengthen the bonds we'd forged. Standing by the water one evening, kite in hand, I reflected on how far we'd come. What started as a fight over a simple kite in a dock had unveiled deeper stories of land, legacy, and community. The lake was no longer just a body of water. It was a living chapter of history, and as the kite soared high, casting vibrant colors across the sky, I felt a profound sense of belonging. This was my land, my home, and together, we had reclaimed not just property, but friendship and respect. The winds of change had brought more than resolution, they had brought a new beginning.